It's actually a follow-up webinar to a webinar series that we had started earlier in the year on migrating from FrameMaker. And today we're going to be looking at a bit more of an in-depth look at what it's like to, actually we're calling it a hands-on look at what it's like to be migrating from FrameMaker to Flare. First off, just want to let everybody know we are going to be recording today's session. So as we are going through the presentation, if you do have to leave, everyone that did sign up for today's session will get a follow-up email with a link to watch this recording again at your convenience. So if you have to drop out earlier, you can be able to come back and check it out. Secondly, we will be saving time for Q&A towards the end. So you can utilize the GoToWebinar console that you're watching this presentation through to actually ask questions, and we'll be flagging them throughout the presentation. So feel free to chime in at any time with a question, and we'll be sure to save time for those towards the end. We also will be talking about some discounted pricing on tools and trainings. Stay tuned towards that for the end as well. But with that, first we'll just do a quick introduction. My name is Jose Sermon, a product evangelist for MadCap Software, and I'm joined by two wonderful presenters, Una Cogavin, who's one of our consultants and a certified expert in TechCom, and Denise Cadillac, who's been on some of our sessions before, as well as at MadWorld, and who's actually going to be presenting at STC next week with me down in Columbus, Ohio. So I'm going to actually turn it over to them to do a little introduction themselves. So Una, why don't we start with you?
Sure. Good morning, everybody. My name is Una Cogavin, and I'm Director at ConvertRight Consulting Services. I have over 20 years of experience as a writer, a content strategist, and also as a manager. I've worked mostly in the software industry, in data security, in the financial services, CRM, and mobile advertising and marketing. ConvertRight Consulting it's a unique technical communications company that we've set up with a partner. And we support software startups, that is out-of-the-box, virtual, on-demand technical publications team. There's a lot of startup companies can't afford a full-time tech writer, so we step in for them. And we specialize in converting all types of legacy content to MadCap Flare, and we operate both in the US and in Europe. And I have approximately 6 years of experience working with Flare.
Great, thank you. And Denise, how about telling us a little bit about yourself and what you do with Blackbot?
Yeah, thanks. Yes, hi everybody. My name is Denise Cadillac. I'm an information architect and a team manager with Blackbot. Blackbot is it's a software company. It's located, actually, we're headquartered in Charleston, South Carolina, and we develop software solutions for nonprofit organizations. I've been with the company. Actually, I've been with the company. It'll be 17 years in August. And we've been using Flare roughly since 2008. I think I started a little bit earlier because I was kind of the lead person on the move. So I think I've been with Flare probably since 2007.
Great. Thank you for that, ladies. All right. Now, what we're going to do now is I'm actually going to pivot over to Una, and she's going to go through an overview of some of the concepts that you're going to be encountering when you're looking at migrating from FrameMaker to Flare, and some of the differences between the tools and a lot of the similarities. And as I mentioned, this was a follow-up to a previous session where we talked a lot about the experiences and some of the experiences of migration and kind of some situational examples. And a lot of that feedback that we got from that presentation was they wanted to see a real-world situation and actually see a migration. So Una's going to be able to take us through that. So, and also I did want to remind everybody this session is going to be an hour and a half. We did budget an hour and a half for this, so if it does seem like we're going long at the hour mark, it's because we did set up an hour and a half for this. So we should be fine on time. But with that, I will turn it over to you, Una, to talk about the process of migrating from FrameMaker to Flare.
Great, thank you. I'd like to start with terminology. In the Frame world, there are specific terms. So the first thing you probably want to know is what do they do, what are those terms, how do they map to a Flare environment. So on the slide you can see the first bullet point is book equals project. So in the Frame world, you have the concept of a book. But in Flare, you have the concept of a project. So these are the highest level components that are going to encapsulate all the files that you're going to need. Then in Frame you have the concept of the chapter file. Now the chapter file has a linear flow of all the content that you want with the headings. In Flare we go from something that's flat and linear to a topic. You're going to have many topics. So if you have like 10 chapters, you may have 100 topics. So basically you're breaking down content and we're using topic-based writing. So these topics are individual files that later they will be constructed using a table of contents. And it's a table of contents that's going to determine the structure of your PDF or your HTML files. We also have paragraph tags and character tags and table tags in Frame. These are now going to be defined and designed within the CSS, which is cascading style sheets. You don't need to be an expert with CSS. Flare will actually create a default one for you if you're not familiar on how to create one. In Frame, we also have master pages, and in Flare, we call those page layouts. Very similar concept. Also, reference pages, you're going to be using the page layouts and the CSS to create those. So in FrameMaker, heading levels, as I said before, they're literal and static. So you have a heading 1, paragraph, heading 2, paragraph. So as you're writing in the file, you're actually deciding how the structure of the book is going to be. However, in Flare, the heading levels, they're relative to the context of the topic. In other words, it's where you've actually used that topic in the table of contents. That is, so that the headings will change depending on where you have put it in the table of contents. So you could have it as a heading 1, or you could indent it to a heading 2 or indent it to a heading 3. So it's actually at runtime when you're creating the target that it actually shows up with the correct level of heading. So those are some specific terms to do with Frame and Flare. But moving to Flare, it also allows you to start talking about things like single sourcing and topic-based writing. So if you can turn to the next slide. So what actually converts? We have great technology these days, so we just assume that you can map one thing to another and the computer can do it for you. But unfortunately, we're dealing with different technologies, so there is some manual fixes that needs to happen. But let's look at what actually converts well first. So the table of contents within Frame, this is actually auto-generated. In Flare, you can manually manipulate and construct the table of contents. But during the conversion, it will take the table of contents from Frame and convert it to a table of contents in Flare. And this is really good because it's going to save you an awful lot of time having to reconstruct that table of contents. When your topics come in, they're not going to necessarily keep a structure like it is in the Frame linear file. Things are going to start getting sorted alphabetically, and it can be a little bit overwhelming when you see just a whole list of files to your left and you're wondering, where does everything fit in? So your table of contents is going to help you with that. So things like index markers, glossary terms, cross-references, conditionals, hyperlinks, special markers like file name and topic aliases, these are all going to convert well. You also have paragraph styles and character styles. Those will be mapped to the CSS and convert. Again, with table styles and also variables, they will map. And of course, the most important thing that's going to get converted is your actual content. Unfortunately, some things get brought in that you don't want brought in. These are overrides of any FrameMaker styles you've had. So one of the most important things you want to do before you import, we can go to the next slide. So before you import, this is actually a very crucial time in your import process. You want to look through your FrameMaker files and make sure that you're using consistent styles. So if you have a lot of inconsistent styles in FrameMaker and you don't clean them up, you're going to have a lot of inconsistent styles in Flare as well. So you want to go through your styles, look for any overrides, and remove any manual overrides. You want to also remove any unused styles. There's no point in cluttering up the Flare project. You're probably at this point more familiar with Frame, so you're better off cleaning out as many styles that you don't use or you don't think you'll need, and getting rid of those before converting over. Because once you convert to Flare, you're going to be using CSS, and if you're not that familiar with it, it's going to be a little harder to do. So one of the things you want to make sure you do is that you generate and update the Framebook so it knows where each cross-reference and all the other links are going to be. So for images, you want to turn your distiller image downsampling off. And this is because Flare has the ability to look at a graphic and see if it has any callouts. And there's going to be 3 different options for converting graphics. And if you have the downsampling turned off, it's going to help a lot in the quality of the conversion. So one of the other most important things is to understand the logical structure of the information in your files. For me, I do a lot of conversion for clients, so I don't have in-depth knowledge of the actual content of the files. So you may also be converting for some other people in your office that you're not necessarily familiar with their particular books. So what you want to do is you want to go in and take a really good look at the information, the content in your files, and learn and get an understanding of where it is you want to break the files up into topics. This is I think is the most crucial part, because this is the most difficult thing to fix if you don't do it right. So topics typically map to the FrameMaker headings. So like heading 1, heading 2, depending on how you've structured your content, you may not need to go any deeper than heading 2. You just want to make sure that the content that's in the topic, it can stand alone by itself. So you're going to have these chunks of information, topic-based writing, and you're going to want to be able to drag and drop into any part of the table of contents or into any book. You want to make sure that it can stand on its own when you do that. We go to the next slide. So the good news is the actual import process is quite quick, and the outcome, you can actually see the outcome in a preview before you commit to it. You can try importing several ways and as many times as you like. The concept here is that there's no right or wrong way to convert. It's just finding the most efficient way for your content. So trial and error is your friend at this point. It'll help you to make your import choices. For example, if you've an issue A and you've versus an issue B, you can convert in 2 different ways and see which works best for A, which works best for B, and then decide what is easiest to fix manually if you need to fix it manually. So again, it's about efficiencies. You're not going to import everything and everything's going to pop out absolutely correctly. And again, it's important to know that you're going to make decisions based on the unique structure and the information in your frame files. No 2 framebooks are going to be the same or going to have the exact same import instructions. So as you're importing, you want to make sure that each topic is going to start with a heading 1. Now this is probably a difficult concept to conceive coming from Frame, where you already have the structure of the heading 1s, 2s, 3s in your file. The important thing to remember is that each topic should be heading 1 in Flare. And the reason is that when you're compiling all those topics together in a POC, it's the position in that table of contents that's going to ultimately decide what heading is used in the actual output. And that's defined at runtime. It's not defined at runtime, but that shows up in runtime. So when you're looking at your topic, it's going to have a heading 1, but once you see it in the PDF output, it may be a heading 2 or a heading 3, just based on where you've put it in the table of contents. So, and that's a good way of being able to sort of move your content around and be able to reuse it. So you want to be at the top level, which is heading 1. So as you import, you're going to be mapping styles from your frame file to Flare. And seeing as this is probably your first experience of doing an import, you can preserve your frame styles, and this is something that I actually recommend, unless you're very familiar with CSS and you know how to design CSS. If you preserve the frame styles in the import, Flare will actually create a CSS for you. and that's probably a good place to start. So if we can go to the next slide. So you've done your import, now what do you do? So the some actually, probably the majority of the work comes up after you import. First things you're going to want to do is you're going to organize your files. So depending on how your Framebook was organized, some people like to have folders and files and folders and images and folders. So as you import, Flare is actually going to look at that structure and mimic it in the Flare Content Explorer. However, if you have like more of a flat system where you don't have folders or graphics in folders, you're going to end up with a Content Explorer with just a whole list of files, all sorting in alphabetical order, mixing topics with graphics. So you probably want to go in and figure out how am I best going to organize these files. So usually that comes down to something like what topics belong into what chapter. Yes, you can reuse them in other chapters, but for now, let's mimic what your user guide looks like so that you'll easily be able to get hold of your topics until you're more familiar with how to find topics within Flare. So you want to do a cleanup of the CSS. This is probably a little bit more advanced, but you probably want to make sure that things did convert the way you wanted them to. In the import, Flare actually creates page layouts, the master pages. So again, you can just keep the default for now, or you can go in and make some tweaks and adjustments. You're going to want to generate your target. Now, a target is a general term for the actual output, the type of output, so PDF, HTML, Word file. So usually, if you're coming in to import, you get to select a sort of a primary target. So in this case, we're going to use a PDF primary target. So as soon as everything's imported, you can actually build that target straight away, because the Flare process, import process, puts everything that you need to actually create that target in place. Now, after all that, you can also use a tool called MadCap Analyzer. It actually will find broken links, any unused styles, and it also suggests content that you could turn into a snippet. Now, a snippet is, in the Frame world, is probably equivalent to a text inset. So it's a piece of text that you can reuse over and over again. Probably one of the major things you're going to end up doing after an import is cleaning up any bullet lists and numbered lists. As you'll see later on, when it comes into Flare, it does create bullet lists and numbered lists, but there is some tweaking that you need to do. Okay, so I'm now going to go and talk about just to give you an idea of a frame to Flare conversion that I performed. This is one sample project that I did for a software company. They had an AutoCAD application, and they had a user guide with about 1,000 pages. It comprised of a single FrameMaker book with about 49 files or chapters. It included about 12 appendices, a glossary, and an index, so quite a hefty size user guide. One of the challenges with that particular project was the large number of graphics and text wrapping around the screenshots. So they had floating graphics. Now I did this conversion pre-Flare 11. In Flare, it handles these graphics really well now. So you have absolute positioning and text wrapping. Fortunately, I didn't have it back then, and that required a lot of cleanup time. If we go to the next slide. This is just some high-level statistics for to give you an idea of how much time it took me to do that. So there's some prep time for the conversion. That was 12 hours. Actual time to do the conversion was 13 hours. Now, I did say that the conversion is quick, but that 13 hours encompasses importing several times and researching what converted well, what didn't, how much effort it would take to manually fix things. So basically, that time was spent in looking for efficiencies. Then once everything was converted, there was the post-conversion cleanup, which was approximately 74 hours. Now I think we're going to switch over and look at a spreadsheet just to give you a quick idea of the effort that's put into planning.
And we're switching presentation control here, so everyone should see a little flicker in their presentation.
So can everybody see the spreadsheet now?
Yep, looks good.
Trying to make it bigger. Okay. So I know it's quite small, but I just want to give you an idea. When I'm preparing to convert, I break the project down into several phases. So the first phase is just the research, which is really me talking to the client and asking them questions like, where should the chapter's graphics be stored, how to structure the files, the HTML files in the content folder by chapter, defining the topic, like how deep do you want me to create a topic, and basically what heading level in the frame book shall we be splitting a topic into. Do you want to keep the same names of the styles, which is usually pretty helpful. And then phase 2 is actually prepping for conversion. So in this particular project, we got frame files that didn't actually have the .fm extension. Not sure why, but Flare doesn't recognize the files unless they have the .fm extension. So we actually have to go in and rename those files. So during the process of conversion, we found some paragraph formats that didn't actually import well, so we actually had to go into Frame and fix those just to be able to actually, for Flare to be able to digest the file. And just going through this, like looking for any missing graphics, then we converted some sample sets of files and noted any styles that didn't convert well. So a lot of this research went into the prepping. And then actually the convert frame to files here, again, we're doing some sample imports. We verified the table of contents auto-generates correctly, the index, conditional tags. Basically just going through it a couple of times to see what works, what doesn't work. And then the cleanup process. So we moved files into the proper folder structure and the graphics into folder structure. And I'm going to click over to the next tab. Just to give you an idea, because people are asking, well, how come it took 74 hours? So I've created a spreadsheet that actually looked at each of the chapters and looked at all the issues, like how many images were there, how many of them were normal that we didn't have to worry about, how many had wrapping images, how many had tables or lists or anything that we needed to know was going to take us time manually. And at the top you'll see there's like 1115 that actually represents the time it's going to take us. So for every time we encounter a wrapping image, it's going to take us 1 minute to fix. And then we just calculated how many there were in each chapter and came up with basically the total amount of time it was going to take to actually do the whole thing. That's basically how we go about figuring out how long it's going to take. Usually when you're trying to find a budget for something like this or set aside time to do something like this, it's very hard to know how long it's going to take you. And you need to kind of know that to know whether you want to do it now, you want to do it later, you want to fit into releases, or do you want to go outside and get help to get you to do that? Do you not actually have time to do it yourself? So people always want to know the numbers and how much it's going to cost, how many hours. So that's a good way of being able to actually yourself figure out what the cost is to do that. And we also had some questions that we needed to ask the client. So, you know, for example, we discovered a lot of missing graphics. So initially we would tell them, you know, we need all the files in the book. We don't want any extra files. So make sure you're not sending us files that we don't need. Send us a PDF of you know, a good final PDF of what the output should look like so that we can compare what we are doing. So I'm going to switch now to an actual example. We're actually going to walk through an import now. Let's slow that down. So here's a Framebook that I'm going to actually import. You can see it's a fairly small book, and it's just for an example. It has a table of contents, it has your regular frame files, it has a glossary and index. And in the introduction chapter, I have also included things like cross-references, variables, tables, conditionals, so that we can actually see what that looks like once it gets converted. So I'm going to go over to MadCap Fair now. So I already have a project open. You can do this with an empty project and just create a project, but I actually have a project I want to import the frame files into. So I'm going to go up to the menu and choose File, Import Project, and then I'm going to go down to FrameMaker Documents and select that. And hopefully, yes, here we go. Okay, so it's asked me my first question, my first decision is, do I want to import to a new project or into this project? So I want to import to this project. Click Next. So now it's saying, what do I want to import? So you can see the little green button, green X. So I want to add the files that I want to import. And actually, because Frame has a book level file, I can just choose that book. So let's see, here we go. It's running a little slow. You can also see this little checkbox below. I'm actually going to unlink this checkbox. It says link generate files to source files. What that's doing is it's actually if you change something in your source file, then you can re-import them again. So that it's keeping that connection. So I'm going to select my book. Click Open. I don't want it to make the link, so I'm going to unlink that and press Next. So now it's scanning through those same files. Which will do fairly quickly. Okay, more decisions to make. So at the top it's saying to me, where do you want to create that new topic? So I'm going to pick heading 1 and heading 2. Because I think both of those, the content in both of those is going to make a good individual topic. So that's where it's going to split the frame file. Every heading 1 and every heading 2. Click Next. So this screen initially is quite intimidating. There's too many things to ask or decide on. So luckily, the default is actually a good way to keep it. So earlier I was talking about frames and the options. Sorry, anchored FrameMaker graphics and the options of importing them. So here you have the 3 options: generate images without callouts, generate images with callouts, or generate flattened images. For this sample, I'm just going to click flattened images. So if I clicked with callouts, the graphics that I import, I'm still going to be able to go in and make changes to any callouts as I was able to do in Frame. That's all I'm going to change in this screen. The rest you can keep as default for now. Okay, now it's asking me what style sheet do I want to use. Now you could either have a style sheet already predefined that you want to use, or, and I recommend this for, this is your first couple of times doing an import, I'm just going to preserve the FrameMaker styles. Now I could also click conversion styles and actually work on creating a CSS here and now and defining some styles. I'm just going to keep it simple and go to next. Now it's asking me paragraph style mapping. So these are all the styles that were in the FrameMaker book. Some of them I'm probably going to end up cleaning out and getting rid of. And here are all the high-level styles that Fur is suggesting as a default importers. So what I'm going to do is, I'm more worried about the heading file. So I'm going to go heading 1. And this is important to note, it's a heading 2 as well. I'm going to do heading 1 and heading 2. I'm going to make those both heading 1s. So remember, we said that we were going to break the file, the frame file, into topics, and the location we're going to break them up in is the heading 1s and heading 2s. And we also said that we want our topics all to start with heading 1s. So that's why I'm mapping the heading 2 to a heading 1. And you can see it's still, after the dot, it's keeping the frame style name, so it's easy to know where this came from within your Framebook. It's a good sort of reference for you. Now, because heading 2 is going to be heading 1, heading 3 is going to be heading 2, and a heading 4 is going to be heading 3. I know it's a little confusing, but it will work, I promise you. So now, after that, what else do I care about? Well, probably the lists, or the list bullets, anything that's a P paragraph. I'm just going to pick all those lists and make them a P for paragraph, body text, P. The rest I'm just going to leave as is, and Flare will take care of it for me. I'm not too worried about those. So you're not going to lose those styles. Flare will just handle them and create defaults for them. I'm going to click Next. And now we have the character style mapping. Now I like to use span a lot, so I'm just going to select all of those and make them turn into a span. And again, it keeps the frame name, so you'll easily be able to recognize which was used in inversion. So I'm going to press Next. And now it's asking me about cross-references. So Flare already has a default cross-reference setup, so I'm just going to use that one for now. And click Finish. Now it's actually doing the conversion. Just to wait a couple of minutes or less. Okay, now this is what I was mentioning earlier. I can close that over. You actually have a preview before you actually commit to this. So if you look to your left, there is all of these HTML files, and these represent all the content in your Flare or your frame file that was broken into topics at heading 1 or heading 2. So I can just go through each one and let's see what it looks like. It looks fairly okay. Don't see any major errors. I see bullets. One interesting thing you'll see is that even though the numbers converted, you'll notice that they're not resetting to 1. So that's something we're going to have to fix manually. Just because of proprietary ways that software like Microsoft Word and Frame use to create numbers, it doesn't map well to HTML and the ordered lists and the unordered lists, so that's going to require some manual fixing. So I'm happy enough with this import, and I'm going to press Accept. So now it's actually going to populate my project with all the files. Okay, so it looks pretty much the same as we did before. So what's the difference? So we can go into the Content Explorer now, and we'll actually see, if I refresh, we now have a new folder with all the files that got imported. And I know it's the folder because it's called Firefighting, so it's named for the book. And as you can see, everything's listed alphabetically. That's a little scary when you see all your lovely content broken down into little pieces and you've completely lost context of where everything was. But that's where your table of contents comes in. If you open up the top and do a refresh, you'll see that the table of contents of Flare has generated from the book table of contents. We open that. And look, we have the exact same table of contents. So you no longer confused as to where things are. So you can actually, from the table of contents, you can actually open that link and there's your file. So just as a quick overview of the actual Flare UI, it can be quite overwhelming. There's a lot of flexibility. It's a very powerful tool. And I know when I first started using it, I was like, oh my gosh, where do I start? What do I need? What I've since learned is that there are a few areas that you're going to be using on a day-to-day basis. The most important pieces are your project organizer and your content explorer. You're going to want to have those two things open all the time. Content explorer is going to literally have all your topics and graphics. It's going to have, on the resources, you've got page layouts, style sheets, table sheets. So everything is stored in that Content Explorer. And then on the Project Organizer, this is where your table of contents is, your targets, your skins, your variables. So once you have those two panes open, you're pretty much going to spend 90% of your time in that. Now, the other thing you're going to want to do is you're going to want to generate targets. And earlier I mentioned that target is the actual output. So is it a PDF? Is it a HTML? Is it Word? We have, in this project, the PDF is the primary target. So I can just say build primary. And note, I haven't actually done anything to any of the files since I imported it. But it's going to be able to print out a pretty decent PDF. And one of the great new features in Flare 11 is that you can actually build something and keep working on your content at the same time. So if you have a particularly long build, you're not going to have to sit there and wait for it to stop. In this case, we will wait. Just a couple more minutes, seconds actually. Now, I can just double click and it will open up the PDF. So if you can see, straight from importing, we actually have a pretty decent PDF. Now, the chapter numbering is going to have to be fixed, but the order of everything is pretty much the order it was in Flare. And this is what I mean by the headings. Heading 1, this was a heading 1. If you go and look at the top, or sorry, in the actual chemistry topic, it's a heading 1. But because it was indented in the table of contents, it now is going to appear as a heading 2. If I can find that under here, you'll see that. It's actually a heading 2. Okay, so that's what a target looks like straight from the import. I think that's pretty impressive. But there are some things that we need to fix. So I mentioned earlier that in the FrameMaker, I created some items that I wanted to go and check back on. And okay, I need to find. Of course, I've lost my notes. Ah, here's stickies. Here we go. So I have some stickies that I want to. Okay, so in chapter 1, I created a cross-reference, and it was under the what the fire protection specialist must know, and it's going to link to the firefighting unit. So I'm going to open up that topic. All right, open. And here's my cross-reference. I click on it, it shows me up here the cross-reference, it highlights it for me. I can open the link that it's going to, so I can see where it's going to, or I can edit it if I want to. I want to change it. So it's just a matter of saying I want it in the project, I want it in this document. I can choose a heading or I can choose a bookmark. And then I can choose different styles of cross-references. I can set these up myself. So I'm going to cancel out of that. One of the other things we did was we did conditional text. You can see this little green box here. Is I click in there, it's showing me that I have conditional text here. And I have actually set up the target to not show that. So remember, we've got the heading, what the fire protection, and then right under we have physics. We're going to get rid of the chemistry because we're going to exclude that due to the conditioning. So there's a little tab up here that we can say just do a preview. So I don't have to generate the whole PDF. And that will show me that the conditional text and tags got imported well. Oh, and I haven't turned it off. That's the point. Need to go into my target. into my conditional text, and I want to exclude. So I thought I'd saved that earlier. So if I go back now and everything is saved, and I preview again, oh, and I'm in the wrong file this time. Go here and preview. You see that chemistry is now gone because it was a conditional and I've excluded it from the target. So my conditionals have converted correctly. Hypertext, so down here I have go to Google. If I click on that, it's going to open up a browser and take me to Google. That converted okay. I have index markers and glossaries, file names, topic aliases, variables. The variable I know is, let's see, where do we put the variable? Let me just check one more time. Purpose and scope. Okay, I'm going to go back into, here's it, purpose and scope. Where does that come from? Oh, this one. So yes, my variable is there. That converted okay. Okay, so now we're going to look at index and glossary markers. So as we, I'm going to regenerate that PDF. Actually, I can just look at the one I've already generated. And it's already generating. Let that generate, and then I'm going to open up the PDF again, and we're going to see that the index and the glossary did indeed actually generate. We already saw that the table of contents did. Just one more. Here we go. Okay. Scroll down. Yeah, I have a glossary. Need to make this a little bigger. That's wrong. I'm not sure where the. Okay. Actually, clicking it, it'll open it a bit bigger. So here we can see that I actually had one glossary term called wild hose. The hose that is unattended. And in the index, you can see that it's generated the index. Now, you can see that the numbers don't have any leaders. We can go in and change that. That's just fixing something to CSS. Generally speaking, you can see everything has converted pretty well, except the numbering. So let's have a look at that. So I'm going to open up a file that I know has got numbering in it. And I believe responsibilities is that file. Close that down. So we can see we do have bullet points. And, you know, an initial parsing, it looks okay. We can look up here, and we can see it's a P list bulleted. P being the CSS style, and list bulleted is the name given to it from the import to match the flare. But if you look at it, it really isn't actually a proper bullet point. So if I clicked on the bullets, now it's a proper bullet. You see it's unordered list. So that was actually an override. Once it gets imported, it's kind of an override. So if I go back, see now it's gone. So you may need to just manually go through and select these. Now at this point, it's good to go into the text editor. Now this is a little bit overwhelming at first, but if you know what you're doing, you can see they've hard-coded these numbers in with the conversion. So you can do a lot. You can do a lot with just search and replace, search and replace. You see, it went from 8 to 9, and we don't want that. We want that to start at 1 again. And a quick way of doing it is through the CSS, sorry, through the XML and doing search and replace. But I can also do it from the UI if I'm not comfortable doing that. So, for example, I can click on these and just make them numbers. It's now an ordered list. I just keep going down through them. You'll see it's turning into an ordered list. sorry, wrong one. There's something that I don't know that's how familiar people are with this, even people who've worked in FLAIR a lot, but if you want to have a follow-on paragraph, but you also want to respect the structure of HTML. If I wanted a paragraph under here, what I would go in is click on that, right-click, and say Make Paragraph. So now I have a P underneath the LI, and then I just need to hit Return, and I've indented paragraphs that's respecting the LI. So I can move this whole thing down here if I wanted to, and it will bring. Well, it should have brought. Yeah, I don't know. Actually, probably was a bad move because the others weren't LIs. But if they were all LIs, I could actually move this down, and the P's would follow it with it. As you can see, it's all getting selected there. So that's how you fix the bullets and the numbered lists. So you would just go through that and clean anything up. Within the project organizer, you have your variables, and you know the variables that are imported because it's named for the book. So we have that one variable. We can go in and we can add another one if we want to. If I decide I want to create another table of contents, I can just right-click, add new table of contents. And I just need to go to my Content Explorer and drag files across that I want in whatever order I want to do them. I can move them up. I can move them in or back out. So that's if you want to manually go in and alter your table of contents or manually create a table of contents. What you have to do is drag and drop. Targets, again, are easy to create. By the way, you can also do like a copy. You can copy and paste a table of contents. You can use the table of contents to create, say, an advanced and a beginner version of a document. So, for example, say advanced would have the equipment chapter, but the basic buttons. So I could go in there, select properties, and use my conditional text to say only in print only do I want this to include this. Maybe in the HTML output it doesn't get included. You can create other conditional tags, let's say basic or beginner, and include or exclude based on those. Conditional tags are great because you can actually use them as a character, a word, a sentence, a paragraph, several paragraphs, a file, a folder. So just you want to go to the lowest level that you need it to be. You want to actually exclude other things. So sometimes just be careful where you put your conditionals. Skins, we're going to take a quick look at skins because we talked about single sourcing, and we created a PDF because that's what our Framebook was doing. But what if you wanted that to quickly become a help system? So instead of generating the PDF target, I'm just going to, without doing anything else, I'm going to generate the HTML5 target. So it's saving all the items and it's building. And any moment now, we will have a help system. Okay, I'm going to open that up. And hopefully Chrome will respond. Or not. Thinking about it. Okay. So not the best example. Probably didn't. This is more to do with the browser I've chosen to open this up in. Let me see if I can.
It looks like you might have used the top nav skin.
Oh, did I? Okay. Let me go and look at the, let me go look at the target. Skin. Oh, it's going to the default. So let me just do the try pane and generate that one more time. So while that's generating, I'm going to talk about imports. When you're actually importing, it creates an import file. So this is actually saving all the choices you made as you imported. So you can actually go in there and see what you chose, the paragraph styles you chose. And this is a great way of, like, if you've got, say, 10 different books, and you've imported the first one and got it down right, then you can actually go to use these settings to import all the other 9 books. So quickly go into our HTML. Here we go. So without doing anything straight from the import, we actually have a help system. And it's keeping to the folder structure. Now we do have to go in and change the numbering on the headers. But for the most part, it looks like a pretty good online help system for not much work. I'll close that down. I think that's pretty much everything. I don't want to overwhelm you, but I just hope you saw that just importing, choosing a few options, you actually get pretty far in conversion. You can start tweaking it then. And so one thing I would say is just don't get overwhelmed with all the additional functionality. Keep to the basics. The basic things you're going to need is a table of contents, a target. You're going to need all your topic files, a table of contents. With just working through that, get a really good feel for how to use the product, and then start adding things like looking in how to change CSS, how to add conditional text. And I think that will give you a good solid grounding on how to use Flare. And I think that's it for my demo. So I'm going to almost 9.
Yeah, that was pretty good. That was a great overview, and I think one of the big takeaways that we like to hit on is that this is designed to be a trial and error process. It doesn't have to be a one-and-done solution. Through the import, you can select how the mapping is going to come across, how you're going to break content into individual topics, as well as have the ability to go back and redo that as you're going through the process, so you can make it iterative and see where the content structure of FrameMaker may cause an issue for you. And we've got a lot of great questions during that portion, so I've been flagging those, and we'll definitely hit on those but towards the end. But for the next portion of today's presentation, we're actually going to be kicking it over to Denise Cadillac, and she's going to be talking about some of the best practices she's found having moved to Flare with her FrameMaker content, some of the key results that they've found, and then just the overall workflow of this. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Denise.
Okay, my section is much easier and much shorter than Una's. I'm just going to talk a little bit about our experience after making the move. First, I wanted to talk a little bit about why we decided to make the move from FrameMaker to Flare. At the time, we'd been in FrameMaker for probably a little over 11 years, and our documentation set was just getting a little bit too complicated, and the requirements for our documentation was getting pretty complicated. At that time, we had 6 overlapping product lines sharing the same content. Today, we have a lot more than that, but that's what we were facing, 4 or 5 years ago. We also had to manage US and UK output, and we had a growing dispersed documentation team. Like I said, it was a pretty complicated situation, and we did try very hard to make FrameMaker work for us. At the time, the last 2 years we were in Frame, we moved to the structured version of Frame. We were under the impression that was going to give us a bit more flexibility. But to be honest with you, it really just did not make that much of a difference. And to be fair, I've not looked at the last 2 releases of FrameMaker, so I don't know if it's improved at all. but our biggest complaint was, it was a pain in the neck to set up, and it was fairly difficult and messy to manage. So we weren't really enamored of the structured process anyhow. And just as a quick aside, I mentioned to you that our content was in structured FrameMaker. If you are in structured FrameMaker and you're looking to move to Flare, you can't import your structured content into Flare. However, we found it very easy to unstructure our FrameMaker content. So that's essentially what we did. We used frame scripts, and we unstructured our content, and then we were able to use the import process in Flare. And like I said, especially if you use frame scripts, it's a pretty easy process. Essentially, all you have to do is you take what were attributes in structured FrameMaker and you convert them back to conditions, and you're pretty much set. We needed granular control over our output, and we weren't getting that. We wanted a template-driven tool. FrameMaker was that, but when we were going to replace it, we thought we wanted something else heavy with templates. But most important, we really wanted to work in a native XML editor. We just liked the flexibility and freedom that came with working in native XML. Those are the primary reasons we made the move. And then if you can go to the next slide, Jose. Hold on one second. Okay. Some of the workflows. So the way we did it, one of the nice things about Flare is there are 3 or 4 different ways to do everything, and that can also create some headaches. When it came to workflows, what we did is, at the time we made the move, we had roughly 17 folks on the documentation team. To start off, we only bought 5 licenses, and there were 5 of us who kind of got up and running and learning Flare. And we tested, between the 5 of us, we tested every way to do just about everything in Flare. And we came away with what we thought were the best options for our documentation team. So, that did take some time, but in the long run, it helped a great deal. Plus, we did internal documentation on what we found and the workflows we did put in place. But the biggest change, of course, is we were moving from a linear environment to a topic-based environment. So we had to do a lot of testing and practicing and playing around with that. But the best workflows we put in place is that we really wanted to take, as I mentioned before, right, granular control of our content was a huge reason we wanted to move. And those are the workflows we focused on. And with Flare, the nice thing is you can control your content, the output of your content based on TOCs, based on the files, based on paragraphs, based on characters if you use conditions. So we put very specific workflows in place for that. We put rules in place. We do require a TOC to be in place for every output need. We require a target to be in place for every output need. Just because you don't want to have to, once you get everything in place with the TOC for product A, and you get the target all set up for product A, you don't want to have to go in there and tinker with any of them when you then need to go back into that same project and create content for product B or product C. So, so we put processes in place for that. We really do make big time use out of the conditions. I'm sure if most folks looked at what we did with conditions, they would disapprove. And because of that, another recommended workflow, best practice, whatever if you do use a lot of conditions in Flare like we do, you probably want to take a look at the advanced condition option that's in the target. The basic option works really well if you just have a handful of conditions, but because the way the basic is set right now in Flare is if an included condition is always going to, if you have an included set with your condition, it's always going to override and exclude. It's far too complicated probably to get into in this stage of the presentation, but definitely worth looking into advanced conditions if you use a lot of conditions. Also, you probably want to put a process in place to take advantage of some of the robust reporting options. There are some analyzer options in Flare itself, but if you are making the move to Flare, at least get a 30-day license or something and take a look at Analyzer and see some of the reporting options in Analyzer. It's a really nice way to keep your content clean and sharp. We also put workflows in place to maximize the single source workflow. That was huge for us. The biggest feature in that is something called global project linking. It's what I would consider probably a bit more of an advanced feature in Flare, but it essentially allows us to use Flare as kind of a content management tool for our content because we don't have a CMS. Global project linking gives us a lot of flexibility there. I said before, we use conditions, TOCs. We also use another process to build some of our output called runtime merge. And finally, the last workflow we have is the use of our templates. We have roughly 40 projects in Flare, and we all pull our template content in from the same project. So we created what amounts to an empty project, just put our template stuff in there, and using this global project link process, we were able to link the other 40, 45 projects to all of the same template. That way, everybody's using the same template. If you need to make a change, you just go to one place to make the change, and everything is updated. And if we can go to the next slide, Jose. Best practices, I've already talked a good deal about best practices, I think, when I was talking about our workflows. But just first and foremost, just keep in mind that you are moving from a linear documentation to topic-based. You really do have to put some sort of a content strategy, some sort of content management process in place before you make the move. You're going to go from having just a handful of FrameMaker files to having thousands of standalone topics, and it gets messy pretty quick. Just basic things like file naming, content creation, the use of templates. Create preferred workflows, which we did. I do really recommend test all the options that are available. Pick the one that's best. Take notes, especially if you run into an option that isn't going to work for you all. Write it down, because when we were testing, it happened every time. Somebody would say, "Well, why aren't we using this?" And I always forgot why. I mean, we were just testing so much. So take good notes when you're testing. Share resources and project, like I said, with templates specific. Shared resource and template. I'll try this one more time. Share resource and project level templates when possible. If you all could use the same CSS, great. Try to restrict the use of master pages. Look at advanced features in Flare. I've already mentioned the one, global project linking, and runtime, actually two, runtime merge. But people seem to shy away from some of these options, and they're really very nice. Plus, you might also want to take a deeper dive into the master page, the skin, the page layouts. I often talk to folks who are still using the out-of-the-box stuff that came with Flare, and that's all well and good, but you're cutting yourself short with what you can do with this tool. There's a book Neil Perlin came out with for Flare 9 called Advanced and Unfamiliar Features in Flare. I'm told he's updating it for version 11. It's a really helpful book if you do want to take a deeper dive into Flare, and it's just a nice way to guide you through it. As I've already mentioned too, document your best practices as you go. And we can move to the next one, Jose. And the last one is talk about key results. Again, most of the stuff I think I've already mentioned, but the number one result is more flexibility. I said we wanted the native XML tool because we did want the flexibility to be able to move our content. We wanted something that wasn't going to be proprietary, and we didn't want to be stuck in a tool again. That was the main reason for the native XML. Plus, the import capabilities in Flare is very impressive. I mean, we can import content. If people give us Word documents, we can import them. You just saw now FrameMaker documents, you can import them. What we can generate output-wise is also pretty impressive. We've gotten to a point now where we rarely run into a wall. We rarely run into a situation where we can't figure out how to handle something that's been thrown our way. Single sourcing, we've definitely made the most out of our single sourcing options. We create a ton of different outputs using the same content. I mean, we have some projects that we have to do 3 different help files for, and it makes it so much easier. Plus, again, because because of the way Flare is designed, you can automate a lot of your processes. So when you do have to do 5 or 6 different outputs from one project, it's easy to automate with a bat file. And then you can even use the scheduler in Windows to schedule it. So lots of flexibility there. And last but not least, easy to manage and clean the content, specifically with Analyzer. Analyzer, you open up Analyzer, it'll show you, undefined variables, broken links. It's just a really great tool. There are also some things within Flare too, the link views and the searchability of the content. And I think that's all I have.
All right, thank you, Denise. As everyone heard, there's a lot of steps to the process that you can choose to go through, but a lot of it is going to be completely dependent on the type of content that you're starting out with. And I want to remind everyone, if you have any questions, go ahead and submit those now. We're going to be going through those shortly. But first, we're going to highlight some resources in the slide deck as well, and a couple of slides so you can have these to review at your convenience. We have a couple of links to our forums that are very active and very useful. Also, an area that we monitor on LinkedIn, the users of MadCap Flare group, and I think there's one for Europe now as well that's pretty active. Obviously, our support team, as I like to say, our award-winning support team, located here in San Diego at our offices here in the U.S. We also have a very long overview of the transition from Flare to FrameMaker in a PDF guide that is available from our site, as well as we've done many different case studies on migrating from FrameMaker and RoboHelp to Flare and going to a true single sourcing workflow where you're able to publish across the print and web kind of spectrum of outputs with great ease. So these are some resources that you can follow up with after today's session, but what I do want to highlight before we get to the questions is that we do have a special upgrade and conversion pricing this month to offer to upgrade to either Flare or the MadPack suite of tools. And the MadPack suite is going to include Flare, Capture, Mimic, Lingo, and Analyzer, as well as a license of contributor for contribution and review from single-sourced content. So if you have any interest, please feel free to contact sales@madcapsoftware.com. Feel free to mention this webinar to get your discounted pricing, as well as you have the opportunity to find out more information about additional training offerings that are available. And it's good to highlight with the upgrade to MadCap Flare and the MadPack suite, it includes now 12 months of bronze maintenance and support. So you have a lifeline to assist you with our support team to help you walk through this FrameMaker conversion and get you all set up with your content going forward. So with that, I'll go ahead and jump to some questions here, and I'll try and go back. Una, this one was going to be for you. There was some in the beginning here that referred back to some of the conversion processes that you asked. And okay. First off is that spreadsheet that you highlighted.
Yes.
Lots of rants and raves about how great that spreadsheet was. So we're going to want to include that. Yeah, that's obviously something that is difficult to start from scratch from. You know, when you don't have any of those line items of what all of the little steps are. So I've got lots of requests to have that spreadsheet sent over, so we'll include that with our documentation.
Well, that's actually copywritten. I decided.
Oh, there we go. Okay, we're not going to include that. That's how you can tell how good it was. Yeah, there we go.
Yeah, you can. My personality and my partner's personality is enwrapped in that spreadsheet. We're control freaks.
All right, well, everyone who liked the structure of that spreadsheet can refer back to the recording of the meeting of this session that you'll get to recreate that. But next question, everybody saw that you were running on a Mac as well. Flare is still native Windows. You were emulating Windows on your Mac there, as you were FrameMaker. Here we go.
And usually I use Windows. Windows is my preferred platform. But to actually import frame files into Flare, you actually have to have a working frame license. And so I was actually using a trial version to do the imports for this particular project. And Unfortunately, Adobe recognized that I had already installed it on my Windows machine and would not let me do it again. So that's why I had to start using my Mac machine. But normally I would be running on Windows.
Ah, I see. All right. So here's a great question that comes up quite a bit. Is it possible, and this is for you, Una,
Yeah.
is it possible to merge content from Frame into Flare? For example, our Flare project is set up for output to CSH, a CSH compatible output. The same content is also in a large FrameMaker files that include additional information. We need to single source and merge that content together. How do we do that?
So I'm sorry, so the first piece is already in Flare?
They have some content in Flare that they
Yeah.
publish using CSH to integrate with an application,
Okay.
and they have some content in FrameMaker.
Oh yeah, so that's really easy.
Yeah.
Yeah, all you have to do is open your project that you have your existing content in and do exactly what I did. Do an import. It will import the content from FrameMaker into that project. We'll create a separate folder for it, and then you can just grab and drag and drop to wherever you want it to do. So it's just as simple as doing an import into that project. Or you could start another project if you want to do, but it's the same thing. Just because you already have content in there, you can also import new stuff. You can do it from Word or anything. The import it allows you to import into an existing project.
Yeah, this I think goes back to the scenario that Denise, you described about how there's 4 or 5 different ways to do everything in Flare. You could import those FrameMaker files into a new project and use global project linking to share those topics from that new project with your existing project. Or, Una, like you said, you could import it into that existing project. And we've actually put a lot of effort to add some functionality that's going to allow you to keep using FrameMaker as the source of that content. So you can keep updating that content even in FrameMaker. That little checkbox that Una unchecked when we were going through the import example of maintaining the reference link to the source files, that integrates with a feature that we call Easy Sync in Flare that allows you to keep importing content on a recurring basis, and it does it when it does a build. It'll check to see if the files that were originally imported have been updated. If they have been updated, they'll re-import them and update the source content that's in the Flare project. If they haven't been updated, it'll just leave what already is in Flare for use with the compile. So that Easy Sync functionality allows you to continuously integrate your FrameMaker content, as well as we have that feature for Word, DITA, and HTML file sets. So very useful when you're trying to integrate other content sources into Flare, and with FrameMaker we make it pretty straightforward to make that a recurring capability. All right, next question. Una, this for you is going through some of your cleanup steps that you had on your stickies there. Can you create a cross-reference from a topic in one project to a topic in another project?
Yeah, I believe. Good question. Can I do that? I probably what I would do at that point, if I have 2 separate projects and I need to leave them as 2 separate projects, I'd probably do that global project where I actually bring in the content from the 2 separate projects, so I'd have a higher level project. If I need to span the 2 projects, that's probably how I'd handle it.
That would be the recommended way to handle it. Absolutely, you could just cross-reference to another file in the form of a hyperlink by hyperlinking to another page. But to get a true cross-reference where you're actually going to have the style sheet control the cross-reference format and all of that, you're going to need that topic in the project that you're cross-referencing to. So you can hyperlink to external files or cross-reference to internal files for the project. All right, and this one kind of goes to, I think, both of you, because this is something that you both, I'm sure, have experienced. As you're importing content, do you reorganize the topics in the content folder? For example, move the images into the resource folder and relink, and what's the best practice there?
Usually I do. I like to keep a tidy deck. So I will probably, I like to keep, if there's chapters that I have in my mind, the things are going to get built into, and I don't do a whole lot of reusing. I like to keep it in a folder with that chapter, or if I have, some of my projects actually have like 3 or 4 different books completely for the same product, but not even like close to reusing content. And I'll keep the books in a folder, and then maybe under that folder I'll have images or so I usually just move them around to the area so they get to a place where I'm comfortable. And the fantastic thing about Flare is that when you drag and drop something, it automatically, well actually it doesn't automatically, it does ask you, do you want to keep the links or do you want to break the links? So there's really nothing in Flare that you can move without it updating the links for you.
Yeah, that's why we always recommend for file management purposes, always move the files around from within the Flare UI, because
Exactly,
then you will get prompted with that link update dialog, so you won't introduce any issues to the content. And now how about you, Denise? Are you as meticulous as Una and myself about file management in Flare?
Yeah, that's actually one of the workflows we have in place, so all of our stuff is stored the same way. So we move everything around. The one thing you do have to keep in mind, though, is this is probably not a restriction everybody has to concern themselves with, but whatever folder structure you put in place in that Content Explorer, it's reflected when you build your output. So like we have one product that requires a very flat folder directory structure in our output, so we can't use subfolders. But for the other products that we don't have to worry so much about, our directory structure on output, yes, we move them around. We have subfolders for concepts, tasks, reference, stuff like that.
Great. All right, had a couple of questions about the CSH IDs in FrameMaker and how they convert. So I posted a link to the documentation of Flare that covers how CSH IDs can be preserved. They're one of those special marker types, also for topic aliases to create correct file names based on headings or custom file names, for example. We got another question here. Let me go ahead and flag this one. And this kind of goes back to the question we just had about image handling in Flare. A lot of people, when they saw that import, they saw all of the images dump into the same directory. You absolutely can move those files. The one thing to be aware of is if you do a re-import, because you've maintained the link to the source files, it will just recreate the original file structure that was set up on the original import. So if you do move the files, you're not going to give a chance to Flare to update those topics directly. But all right, next question. I must, and this is, I'm sure, one of the people that really liked your spreadsheet as well, Una. I must transition a 2,400-page H1 through H7 legally numbered heading specification document. What was your familiarity with Flare before making that 1,000-page transition? So just trying to give, if you that it took you that X number of hours to get that 1,000-page document converted, what was your level of familiarity before you started that process?
For that particular project, I probably had worked in Flare for quite a while, probably like 5.5 years. That's a fairly recent project.
Ah, okay, good. So some familiarity is what we say, fairly familiar. All right.
Well, I have to say the reason I did one of the reasons I did create that spreadsheet is because it was a consulting project, so I had to be able to go back to the client and say, this is why it costs so much.
For billing purposes, of course.
For billing purposes, and quite frankly, when you see the numbers, even you yourself don't believe it can take that long.
Yeah.
And so, you know, just that was one of the main purposes of creating it, because I know once you put numbers on a page, people believe you for some reason. If you just say it, they don't. But I think it's a good way of tracking and checking things off as you're going through them and not forgetting things.
All right. Last one here. I think we got this one. This is a good one. And this one's good for both of you as well. Regarding the preparation phase of the frame file conversion to Flare, with regards to cleanup, on a scale from 1 to 5, 5 being the most critical, how important is the prep phase to the overall conversion? Meaning, is it worth spending more time on prep that will save issues during the conversion, minimize the time needed for cleanup?
Absolutely. Get as
So what?
clean as possible.
So five, which is what you say, being the most critical.
I'm at 10.
Denise,
10
would
is
you
the most
concur?
critical.
Yeah, definitely. That's where we put almost all of our time.
Yeah. Think of it like building a house. You want the foundation to be solid. So the first things you build on need to be solid. You're most familiar, unless you're not familiar with Frame, for some reason you've inherited this and you usually use Flare. Wherever you're most comfortable, is where I would say you'd want to do the prep work, and I think that's probably in Frame.
Great. All right. Well, with that, everybody, I do want to thank everyone again for their time today. I think we can go ahead and wrap up now. We're about the hour 24-minute mark on my watch, so I think we're great with this presentation. I want to thank my presenters, Una Cogavin, consultant and MadCap whiz extraordinaire, along with Denise Cadillac, who you can see along with me in Columbus, Ohio next week for the STC Summit. Any additional questions that you may have, please feel free to follow up with panelists at madcapsoftware.com, and we'll get those to our panelists so they can assist you with whatever information you may still need. Again, you will receive a follow-up link to this recording so you can watch it again at your convenience. And to take advantage of those upgrade pricing or to schedule a live in-person demo with you and your team, please feel free to contact sales at madcapsoftware.com. With that, I will say goodbye to everyone. Una, closing words?
I just can't say enough good things about Flare, even before I started working with you guys closely. I love the tool. I love your support. I love how you treat your customers.
Awesome. Thank you. Denise, closing words?
Yeah, now roughly 5-6 years in, definitely very happy with the move. Would never go back.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, everyone, again for joining us, and have a great rest of your day. Thanks, presenters. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.